There we go. All right, hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Katie Grillo and I'm the GIS Web Technology Specialist at the City of Cambridge in Massachusetts. I'm also an adjunct professor at Jefferson University and your current NEARC board president. So today we are here for another NEARC community event. And it's great to see a lot of familiar names on this call today. So welcome to those who have been to events before, and welcome, of course, to everyone if this is your first time. So this is a NEARC community event, as I said, and the NEARC group is actually the Northeast ARC Users Group, and we are a volunteer-based nonprofit organization that hosts 2 major conferences in the Northeast every year. So we have a one-day event in the spring, which is coming up in actually just a few weeks. We will be in Westfield State University on Monday, May 16th, back in person. So there's still time to register for that event, and I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of today's session. So that's our one-day event for the spring, and then we also host a 3-day event every fall, which this year is going to be at the Mount Washington Inn in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, later on in November. So in between our 2 major conferences, we've started hosting these virtual community events. And these are an opportunity for us to come together between our conferences and connect and collaborate on a variety of different topics or themes. So generally these are hosted once a month, and they're a little bit more on the informal side. Some of them are just the informal mappy hours where we're just coming together to chat and hang out, or we do events like this one where we have a guest speaker or somebody joining us, and then we do discussions or hands-on activities or that kind of stuff. So today we are joined by Brian Baldwin, and I will let him introduce himself in just a moment. But just high-level logistics for today, what we're going to do is Brian's going to give us a little bit of an introduction on today's topic, which is a discussion around the idea of this shift in higher education. So kind of a shift between desktop GIS more to ArcGIS Online or web-based GIS. So Brian will help to introduce today's subject, and then today is really designed to be very interactive. So I hope you all came ready to discuss and chat and talk about our theme. We will have a number of different breakout rooms that are just opportunity for you to connect with just a small group of folks, and then we'll come back together in the room to discuss. And we'll do that a few different times with a few different questions and prompts. And then the idea is that at the end of the event, we'll talk about kind of ways to move forward. So we'll discuss some of the challenges and then discuss the ways that we can discuss some of the solutions and ways to move forward. So as I said, going to be really interactive today. We're really excited. Brian, I will hand it over to you to go ahead and please introduce yourselves and tell us more about today's theme.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Katie. Let me share my screen to get started and make sure I can see everybody's faces-ish. Awesome. So yeah, I just want to say first, thanks so much to Katie and to NEARC for the opportunity to kind of present and talk about this topic. It was actually really funny. It was I just reached out to Katie via LinkedIn, really seeing how adjunct faculty and instructors are kind of connecting, and it really kind of grew organically from that conversation. So excited to engage with the broader NEARC community on this. And apologies, I can tell I've got a delay, so that's probably kind of funky with the audio and the video, but we will persist through the challenge. So first off, to kick off kind of our interactivity, I'd love people to use kind of the little hand function in Zoom, if you wouldn't mind. So a little thumbs up or some kind of reaction. So wanted to see first off, thanks Bahar. First off, who is anyone on the call that is a student? So currently kind of a student. If you wouldn't mind giving me a thumbs up. We've got
And just as a
Andrew,
reminder, to get to that thumbs up on the Zoom panel, you click the reactions button, and then you'll
perfect.
see that's where the raise hand function is, but there's also like the clap and the thumbs up and a laughing crying face. So Brian's asking you to give a thumbs up if you are a student. Thanks, Brian.
Perfect. Thanks, Katie. You can you can be silly too if you want to give a crying face or something else. So students, thanks so much, Andrew and Nate. Anyone who's currently adjunct faculty or an instructor or faculty, or Bahar, I think you can sneak in for this one too. Anybody who's kind of affiliated with a university or even K through 12. Okay, perfect. Good mix of folks. And then lastly, anybody who's from industry side, so state, local government, or nonprofits, or I guess anybody else. Awesome, cool. Thank you so much. So that's great to see. Fun to see kind of the mix of those that are in attendance. And I will definitely try to speak to kind of all those different populations we've got on the call. And so first off, wanted to do just a quick introduction to myself. So my name is Brian Baldwin. I live just north of Boston, right up near the New Hampshire border. And I've been out here for about 4 years. And I've been in GIS, a practitioner, user in this field for, I lose track of the years, but, I always say 15 years, and I feel like I keep saying that every single year. So I don't even know how long anymore. But, went to undergrad, got a degree in geography. That's where I had my first exposure to GIS, and then did a range of different things. So in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a picture of New Orleans. And that's some work I did while I was in graduate school. So I went to University of New Orleans, got a degree in urban and regional planning, master's degree, and did a lot of kind of boots on the ground recovery work post Hurricane Katrina. And the map you can see the two women holding up is really hand generated in a sense, where that was community members walking house to house to capture and say, had somebody returned to that property yet? And the top right one I'll usually point to as well. So I worked in Hawaii for a short amount of time, and that was doing some invasive species work. And so that was a mind-numbingly boring job, but sounds sexy on paper. But I was literally just scrolling through images that looked like this, looking for that kind of species that was encroaching inside the canopy. There's a lot of better automated ways to do this today, but it was certainly a lot of time sitting in the software, scrolling through and looking for things. And then I also, full disclosure, work at ESRI as well. So I've been at ESRI for about 8 years, and my role is as a solution engineer. It's kind of a technical generalist, helping support higher education. And then all the other hats I wear, I also teach on the side, as well as Katie does. And I teach over at RIT. So I teach some intro courses and just did a graduate level GIS course this last spring. I've also taught over at Salem State as well. So the impetus for this is really to get a discussion going around how GIS has changed and where the technology is going. So I wanted to briefly, as kind of a joke introduction, have us time travel back to 2004. So I know we're kind of spread across a number of demographic groups here, so everybody will have had different experiences. But for those of us that have been in the field of GIS for a long time, this might feel kind of eerie. So 2004, Facebook was literally launched, founded that year. So none of us had Facebook. It wasn't something that kids were already abandoning and is already not cool anymore. The company had just started. So if you're an instructor, if you're a faculty member, this is about the age of your students in 2004. So this is my daughter here when she was about 3. And so to do that kind of, the little bit of translation there, roughly about 20 years old. And then the last one, this was what your phone looked like. So you were not texting, you were not taking pictures, you were not, looking at the stars. It was basically literally a mobile phone, just a device for calling people. As well, in 2004, this is when ArcMap, the first kind of iteration of ArcGIS was released, that kind of desktop foundational tool that a lot of people still think of as kind of the cornerstone for the methods and the ways that GIS is taught. And so the point of kind of bringing these up is just that reminder that the tech in our world has changed so much in the past 18 years. If you just think of the ways that we interact with people in our day-to-day, the ways we use technology, that our entire world has shifted. And my big kind of flag waving movement is to say, we need to kind of think as well of this huge shift in how people are getting exposed to and using GIS and spatial tools and technology. I love making maps. I love creating, still like hand, printed things you can create and have something, tangible in your hand. But it should not be the only way, in my experience, that students and others are getting exposed to the technology, and it should not be kind of the apex of what they're learning and what they're doing. And not that just, students aren't needing to kind of set up plotters with pens and ink anymore, maybe some are, but it also shouldn't be just kind of trying to get a map for a PDF. Thinking back to, again, our phones and the ways we're using technology, this is how we're interacting with tools and data and information today. And so GIS should be, native and be able to be used and be a foundational tool and resource in that same sphere. And this is just one story to kind of illustrate that. And so what does Huntington Beach, California have to do with GIS? And so I believe it was last year, but all of a sudden people that were walking the shore got this strong whiff of oil in the morning. And this was in October. And very quickly, what had happened is that there was a lot of offshore oil infrastructure along the coast of California, and a pipeline had ruptured. And hundreds of thousands of gallons of oil were leaking out. And the issue is that time is of the essence, because to be able to save wildlife, to be able to ensure that the shore and the less ramifications that take place, all of that oil needs to be collected before it gets on shore and starts to get into wetlands and marshlands and get onto wildlife, like in these pictures. And so what took place is there was an organization called the Surfrider Foundation that created a simple mobile application, so basic. All it did is take a photo and also let you log the location where you were taking that photo, so that they could crowdsource the collection of information, so that anybody along the California coast that was seeing oil or seeing it starting to wash up on the beach could then report that location, so that they could have a dashboard and then in real time start to track, where oil was coming on shore, so they could see how dynamic the situation was changing. And so rather than, GIS being this kind of static map, which they could have used and created to share information about this changing spill, they engaged thousands of people to collect, capture information, and then share it out. And in a similar vein, one of the applications I think all of us are probably tired of seeing is this dashboard from Johns Hopkins. I know we all wish kind of COVID was just in the rearview mirror and we don't have to talk about or think about it anymore. But for me, this is still one of the most illustrative, ways that it shows how GIS has changed fundamentally in the past 5 to 10 years, where even 5 years ago, the ways that we probably would have, gotten summaries or, the updated information about how COVID was changing would probably be a static PDF or just a report showing cases globally. But this dashboard is something that was dynamic, had sources of information from dozens of places, all web-based. Anybody could load this up and use this, inside of a browser, and there were versions built out that were mobile compatible. This doesn't need to have somebody with a PhD in GIS or geophysics or whatever it might be to understand and use. And it's also something that students and others, even in introductory courses, could start to build out or understand how they could build something similar to share their research, share their results, or even on the industry side, we've seen dozens of applications, even thousands of them for bike lanes or infrastructure projects, how to take information that was many times shared in a static way and now make it something that's dynamic and a real-time look at that information available to anybody. And so for me, this is that question I keep coming back to is, have those big changes in GIS really had an impact on the skills required for the workforce today? So these are a couple different job postings that I went through, and this certainly does not have a if I was to be go up to be try to publish this as an article, I don't think it would meet the requirements of a review board. But anybody could go out and do a similar thing to just kind of go and see, what are some of those anecdotal things people are asking for. And the point here is that it's no longer just kind of ArcMap and the production of maps. It's web tools, it's mobile tools, it's telling stories with data. It's the ability to ingest, automate, and get this kind of information published out to more users. And so these are some of the things that I've highlighted on here, web, mobile tools, dashboards. I love this one, user requirements, that ability to kind of sit down with a user. This is Katie's probably day-to-day life, understanding the needs of people at the city and helping to meet their requirements with applications, with getting things deployed. So web, mobile, story maps. I think people get kind of the drift for where kind of a lot of that stuff is going. And so of kind of those postings and the ways that we've seen technology going, these are kind of 5 main key areas that I've kind of pulled out as the places that I've kind of seen GIS going towards. The 4, under requirements gathering are kind of the big 4 I would point to. Data as services is really speaking to the fact that, yes, shapefiles work as a way to ship information around, but they're an almost 20-year-old, way of storing and, using information. For me, it's about how can we better share information that's available as a service that users can just connect to, pull into a map, and then share out information that's connected to even the city of Cambridge or city of Boston publishing live traffic information or crime data or parcels. You don't need to download that as a shapefile anymore. You can just connect to that live feed and publish that out in your own applications that are now referencing that authoritative information. The application configuration line here, everybody try to say that 100 times, is really about, it's not that you need to become a programmer and only build applications using, Java or JavaScript. There's a wealth of different applications and frameworks out there that students and on the professional side can get their hands dirty with, that is about just configuring web applications. So it's really kind of how can you use GIS on the web and in a framework that allows you to just quickly build out applications to expose things to users. Somewhat related to that is the automation and scripting need. This has been something, Python, you can read beneath the lines here that people have been saying a growing need for students and professionals to have, a strong skill set there. And that need is only increasing as things become more web-based, and that ability to, not try to hand clean data or hand build applications, but actually automate the ways that you can update data sets, or even automate the ways that you could publish or alert your users of changes that are taking place. And then the last one, and I've seen a big, obviously kind of gap in some of the skills that students are coming out of programs related to enterprise and cloud-based skills. When I ask, students in some of my courses, what is Amazon to you? I mean, I think I'm kind of leading or kind of cheating with that question, because I as well, if somebody said that, would say, oh, it's where I order all my things. We all use Amazon to order whatever and have it delivered to our house. But the fundamental business of Amazon is AWS. It and Azure are the underpinnings for basically the modern internet today. And some of those, you don't need to come out of school being, a DevOps or a programmer or somebody that can, architect a full GIS up in the cloud, but understanding how the modern internet works and the reliance of modern GIS and some of these skills on those foundational technologies is really critical. And it's something I've seen a lot of employers kind of asking for that skill set. And there's just a big gap in some of those skills. And, if students are coming out of programs with some of that knowledge. And so with that, I think I'm going to stop sharing. And I wanted to say, it's not all doom and gloom. I think this is where we can kind of get some of the discussion started and hopefully, just work as a community to talk about what is industry doing, what are the needs that students are seeing, what are the skills that they would like to be able to come out of programs with, and then how can we help programs, what are faculty and staff doing on the higher ed side to equip students for the world of GIS and spatial today. So with that, I'll stop sharing and I'll turn it back over to you, Katie, and we can turn this into not me just kind of pontificating, but actually have some discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Brian. And I've already got so many different ideas and things spinning in my head. Like even when you were showing all the different pictures from 2004, I was thinking about, what did GPS look like back then? Like I remember taking a GPS course in like late in college, and we had to go out with our Garmin's handheld, and now you can just get so much of that just on your phone as well. So so what we're going to do now is we are going to, as Brian said, kind of start the discussion. So we have a number of different questions that we're going to pose to the group. And the idea is that we'll pose the question and then put you into the breakout rooms just for about 5 minutes, just so you can kind of start to brainstorm together. And then we'll come back together as a group and discuss that question as a big group. So the first one, the first question that we had was, where is the tech going? So are we still map makers, or are we programmers, or are we both? So the first question is kind of, where's the tech going? Like, where do you see the tech going? So I am going to open the breakout rooms now, and then we will see you all in just about 5 minutes. Hi, Sophia. I'm going to assign you. Hi, I'm going to assign you to a breakout room. We're just having a discussion now about where is the tech going.
Yeah, so I just joined because I had class up until now. I just joined when you opened the breakout room, so I have missed the initial conversation. So
okay,
yeah.
Let me, sorry, I'm just trying to make sure we've got nobody alone with the recording. So Brian, I noticed that you got thrown into a room there. I couldn't, I hope that worked out well for you. And yeah. Sophia and I were just chatting in the main session because she joined a little later. So, so now what we want to do is just kind of talk a little bit about what was going on in our sessions. Sophia and I were just talking about how I teach a class called WebGIS for Design and Development. And even though it's a WebGIS class, my students still need access to desktop software for some of the different workflows that we're teaching them. So do other people have experience with that as well? It's like you kind of are still, you're definitely still bridging the gap. You definitely still need both, right? I see someone with their hand up. Bahari?
Hi, yes, thank you. Good to see you, everyone. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Katie. So for having WebGIS, this is what Robert and I were talking also in the breakout room. I am using WebGIS across Northeastern University. I am the GIS specialist and also adjunct faculty with College of Professional Studies. And across Northeastern, we have many disciplines who are interested in GIS. And I got many historians and College of Social Science and Humanities to work with me on producing the story maps and web apps. So far, maybe 5% of them needed the desktop version because everything could have been handled on the online, which was a great success to me because I got many more people interested in GIS. That's what I like, to have more and more people loving GIS. And to me, that was a huge step toward adopting narrative text and also images in addition to maps and communicate better with publics. What I find regarding the coding and Python language, there are some needs. I am saying that I'm not like on top at my best knowing all these languages, especially JavaScript. I have used Python before, but anyway, I do see that need increase at my school at least. Thank you.
Thanks, Bahar. I was going to say that the one thing we saw in our group, thank you, Michael and Jeff, was, and it was interesting, just a focus on, I think it was, almost on the desktop piece because of the need for data management skills still. I can't remember if it was Jeff or Michael who said it, but it was the, everybody's almost interested in kind of creating the flashy applications, but, you can't really create a flashy application if your data is crap. So it was, that need for students and others to still, have fundamentals in, data management and the ability to kind of, get their hands dirty in there, I mean, is still a huge need.
Yeah, from my perspective as somebody, and I'm sure Katie, you have some insight into this as well, as somebody who works for a municipality, even beyond teaching students who are actually interested in GIS, I have to, at least on a basic level, get people of the public to understand what GIS is. So I'm currently working on a first draft of a story map to put right on the front page of the GIS division for the DPW on what is GIS, how do we use it, how do other governmental and non-governmental organizations use it so that they can better understand why they pay my salary every year, pretty much, because we're a relatively small town with a very widespread DPW who does water, sewer, storm water, beaches, parks, cemeteries, all that stuff falls under DPW, and as a result is managed in the GIS, in addition to me helping out like the assessor and things like that. So it all comes across my desk, and the more I think the public understand sort of the underpinnings of this and how we can use it, and I've put together some sort of like no zoom, no pop-up kind of maps so that they can't drill too far in and end up with questions, but also they can see what a street looks like when I put water, sewer, stormwater, parcel lines, all of that right on top of each other, so they can see how they're interacting and how that affects our planning and how the national flood hazard layer gets put together and information like that as well.
Awesome, Robert. Thanks for sharing. That's really cool. What city or town are you with?
Town of Rockport, Mass.
Rockport, cool.
Yep.
Matthew?
Yeah, Matthew Miller, Southern Connecticut State University. And I don't know if this is a question or a comment, kind of a combination, because the question you posed is, are we map makers or are we programmers? And I do wonder about describing ourselves as programmers, because when people think programmer, they have a very specific thing in their mind. That's computer science. Like you have a computer science degree, you're fully tech fluent in a particular language, and you're coding from scratch. And that's very different from what GIS generally is doing, particularly as extensions through ARC. So is it still appropriate or useful to say we're programmers, or should it be something different? Like, should we not say we're programming? Should it be something more like scripting? Is there something that doesn't evoke the entire computer science side?
I think that's a very interesting question, and something that I was just discussing with one of my colleagues at Jefferson University, because we're thinking about adjusting the name of the course that I teach. And one of the proposals was to call it web scripting. And I said that maybe we should just call it web development, because to me, there is a difference there between whether you're just writing the scripts or building the applications using some of these programming languages. How do folks feel about that? Robert?
I would hesitate to sell yourself short in what you're doing. Not to say that you want to take full ownership of the term programming necessarily, but I have an online friend who works for NASA, and he's working on one of the Mars rovers for them. And all he doesn't, as a programmer, as somebody with a computer science degree, he works on a very small portion of the program. And that's essentially what we're doing as well. If you write a very simple batch of code that's updating some data across your entire data set so that you can use it in your web app, you're not programming. Just like he's not the guy who's building out the entire application for the rover, but his very specific part is very important for the assigned application. And I guess in that respect as well, some of us who are in the GIS field don't have GIS degrees, just like people who are programming don't necessarily have programming degrees. I have a fisheries and wildlife degree. I have a minor in GIS, and I had some great professors who gave me a great understanding of GIS concepts that allowed me to carry it into a career. But I know just as much about setting up Sherman traps as I do about ArcGIS at the end of the day. So I think it's really important to understand that degrees aren't really anything when it comes down to it. As soon as you're 5 years into your degree, you might be so far away from what you studied in school. It's more so what you can learn from the internet and from your colleagues, and putting people around you who you can help through the problems that you face or questions that you need to answer.
Yeah.
It's like, Matt, you've got your hand up again.
Well, yeah, with that response of mine, I'm kind of curious what people's thoughts are to what sort of depth should programming be taught in higher education. So if there is programmer and we're describing this program, I'm just curious, what is industry looking for students to know when they come out?
Great question, Matt. Yeah, I'd be curious to hear anybody on the industry, state, local government side, thoughts.
I think Python is still one of the number ones that we hear about, especially if you're just talking about GIS. And I mean, you can use Python certainly desktop, but now you can also use it online through like Python notebooks through ArcGIS Online. So I do feel like Python is still one of the leading languages that are important for GIS. But then I would also, after that, maybe argue for JavaScript and being able to build custom applications using JavaScript. But I'm also very web focused, so I'm curious what other folks feel.
JavaScript is definitely the one that I feel I wish I knew more about personally, because I didn't get any exposure to it in my program in college, and it's definitely very useful across the board. Something as simple as setting up a very basic web calculator that you can put on the town's website or things like that. If you have that JavaScript background, then you can very easily put that thing together. And especially working in a small municipality, I become sort of the tech reference for anything DPW adjacent rather than just the GIS guy.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I would definitely say is, even if it's something as simple as a lecture at a lab about it, SQL I think becomes very important as well. Something I ended up having to teach myself, just basic table queries and things like that to be able to pull data out of these larger databases. Because the internet is a helpful place, but if you don't understand the basics of SQL, it can get really confusing to try to put together table joins and queries and things of that sort.
Yeah, those are great points. I was going to mention SQL also, but as far as JavaScript is concerned, I think that's really essential. And the one thing that's of interest is that the new ESRI arcade language is basically JavaScript.
Yeah.
So, one, you can figure out the other one pretty quickly. So at UMass, we have a accelerated GIS master's program, and we teach both GIS programming, which is Python based, and web GIS, which is a lot of JavaScript.
Awesome, thanks, Andy.
Right. Did anyone else have any other thoughts or questions around kind of this idea of like where the tech is going? Are we map makers or are we programmers?
I think one other comment with the question of, what do the employers expect? In a lot of cases, especially if you're working amongst, some older people who are less tech savvy. I definitely see people, like Andy, who definitely have, their feet under them when it comes to tech, but there are definitely some people I interact with on a day-to-day basis that have no idea what they want. They know what they want it to look like, but they have no idea how it gets there. So I think being able to, beyond the skills and the language that you learn to speak scripting wise, you also need to be able to digest technology for people so that they can understand what you need in order to get things done. And that's definitely something we've run into with trying to switch the way some of our permitting and things like that are done from paper forms into something that we can track dynamically and be able to manage in a web format. Is software licenses are expensive, but at the end of the day they're much worthwhile as far as the the productivity gained and things like that. So being able to I know when I personally applied for the position that I have now, they had like ArcView and a few other very things that predated me learning GIS when I started in almost 10 years ago now. And so they had just when they had originally hired their first GIS program manager, they had the description of the job. And then when I applied, I was like, well, I know the basics of this stuff, but I think what you guys actually mean is XYZ. And they were like, okay, great. Yeah, we'd love to be able to move forward with the stuff, which was, encouraging. But like I said, sometimes they don't know what they need in the first place. And I think it's our position as people who are keeping up with the technology to be able to relay that information to them in a way that's palatable and try to be, in some cases, cost effective as possible. That's definitely something that, being in a small town with limited budget, that you unfortunately don't have access to unlimited funds by any means.
Yeah, Don?
Yes, I think, Robert, what you were saying is spot on. Knowing how to take information from a non-technical person and translate it into a technical requirement. And I say you don't even always have to give them back the tech. You just have to take in what they're looking for, kind of, turn that into a technical requirement for yourself and come up with some examples to make sure that what the picture in their head is matching kind of what you're getting. I think that's huge. And then I'm also finding, with the more and more we want story maps, you also have to be, this wonderful writer and this, and developing this huge, it's not now just not it's really diving into why is the project being done, what else is being done about the project. So being able to have all of these things that, I was not an English major and Grammarly is my best friend, but having all of these things together and yes, it just kind of I think it is very, very important, and having that a little bit of everything, because at the end of the day, GIS is a tool and it can be used in so many different ways. So if you are at, you know, a DPW, well, you can kind of focus on there. But if you're going into the consulting world, you don't ever know what you're going to get, and so you kind of have to be a little bit of everything, and at least have a good understanding of where things are going and, you know, where things have been. So when you get those words like, you know, that make us all feel like dinosaurs, you know, command line ArcInfo or or ArcView, that you at least know what they're talking about, and so then you can kind of go and get the other information. It's also a lot of times it's just being that translator. So
absolutely. I feel like both Robert and Dawn, thank you for your comments. I feel like that's a nice transition into one of the other questions that Brian and I wanted to pose, which is, what are the needs? Like, what sort of skills and what sort of knowledge of the technology do students need to be focusing on? But also curious for those of you that might be hiring managers or other people that are working for organizations, like, what are you looking for? So I think what we're going to do is we'll pop back into breakout rooms just so you can talk about this in a smaller group just for another 5 minutes. I did recreate the rooms because we had some people come and go. So for those of you that are new, we're just going to pop into a breakout room just to chat in a smaller group about what are the needs, what are the sort of skills and technology that you think students need, or that you as a hiring manager are looking for. So put you in the rooms, and then we'll bring you back together to talk about it as a larger group. Oh my gosh, this is fabulous. Hi.
Hey, Kitty.
Andrew is my new intern, and Victoria was one of my students.
Oh, good.
All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. That was a treat for me. I ended up in a room with Andrew, who is our brand new GIS intern, and Victoria, who is actually one of my students. So we had a fantastic conversation, just the two of them kind of sharing their stories of being current/recent GIS graduates. So I'm wondering if Andrew or Victoria, if you'd be willing to talk a little bit from the student perspective of kind of what are the needs or what are the skills that you're focusing on in your classes.
Definitely, I can jump in. So I first started learning GIS. I started with the ArcGIS desktop that I'm sure many of you know and love. However, in the second semester of my master's program, they made the transition to Pro. And then as I was ending the program just this past December, I was hearing all this stuff about online, but Salem State hadn't caught up to teaching online yet. So I'm taking a course at Harvard Extension that's kind of this survey of all the online stuff, but it's meant to be an intro to GIS through online. And so I've kind of gotten both desktop and online kind of siloed. So it's been interesting to see kind of the progression where you can tackle it from a bunch of different ways. And I think it's completely dependent on who needs the GIS, because I know Katie made a great point that some people in the city of Cambridge, if they just need light editing capacity, maybe they just can use just an online license if they're taking a spreadsheet and they're turning it to a bunch of points, which I think makes a lot of sense. But if you're want to do a lot of like static maps, then certainly a license with Pro or desktop would be a lot more useful, or if you want to do a lot of analysis.
I'd be curious, Andrew, did you feel like it was a gap for you when you've kind of been looking for internships, or when you've kind of tried to apply yourself, and to different jobs? What are the skills, I guess, you wish kind of you'd had from your program, or what are some of the things you were glad that were part of it?
That's a great point, Brian. So I kind of was working during my master's program. So starting last March, I realized I really wanted to have a job with GIS. So since last March, I think I've applied to over 100 jobs before landing at the city of Cambridge.
Wow.
So I've seen a lot of job descriptions, and I got a few interviews, and those interviews are what led me to learning some web design and the WebGIS. Is I would get into an interview and they're like, you have this great desktop experience, but we love if you knew, I think one group wanted survey 123 specifically. But then a couple other companies were like, we'd love to have you know JavaScript, because they saw it as this like, well, if he knows JavaScript, then he can create tools for us that then we can sell to other companies. And that was kind of a feature to them. That's kind of what led me to try to fill that gap. And so I think you can both fill that gap with JavaScript, but also with probably ESRI tools. Because as I've been learning in the online course, there's so many tools that you can create custom apps with without having to touch JavaScript. It's kind of insane.
Awesome. No, it's great to hear your thoughts on that, Andrew. Just, I mean, that experience of yes, being, applying and being boots on the ground for like 100 positions. No, just fascinating. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Does anybody else want to share kind of the student perspective, and then maybe we can talk about like the education perspective after that from like folks that are educators? Victoria?
Hello, sorry, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So I was a student of Katie's. I was fortunate enough to have her teach me the online platform and some of the applications that go along with it. I'm currently, for perspective, I'm an architecture student and I'm in my last year right now. I've used the skills that I've learned from Katie's class to benefit me in the internship that I currently hold. We were talking a little bit in the breakout room about how, so I was actually introduced to the online platform prior to, the desktop platform prior to the online platform. So I'm more comfortable with my workflow going from desktop, and then I'll export to online in order to integrate my maps, say for like a story map or some kind of presentation that I'm working, that's my workflow. And I think I generally prefer working out of desktop just because of the vast many more applications and tool sets that you can use comparing to the online platform, which seems to be like, I call it a light version of desktop, where some of the tools that you can use are definitely much more basic. And I agree what we were talking about before, in the sense of that's for very basic editing, very basic analytic type things, quickly being able to create a map. But I feel like even from a student, some of the stuff that I had done, like for example, I was experimenting with one of the tool sets on desktop, running a solar suitability analysis within an area. And that's not something that I would have been able to do on the online platform.
Yeah.
And I think I would like, I hope in the future, like I can foresee the online platform starting to be more enhanced and sort of beefed up. Especially, so like I said, from an architecture background, we already see ESRI making moves with GeoBIM, trying to integrate Autodesk softwares. And I foresee the online platform starting to cater to all those different applications and start to kind of beef up. But as of right now, and from a student's perspective, I feel like it's not quite there yet. And I wouldn't be able just to work off of the online platform. I'd need to go from desktop to online in order to do the projects that I'm looking at least, or the projects that I'm creating.
Thank you, Victoria and Andrew, for sharing. I saw Robert's hand up, but Brian, did you have a quick?
No, I was just wanted to say thanks to Victoria for sharing as well. Yeah, go for it, Robert.
Yeah, related to that, they had the ESRI Geodesign Summit last week. I'm not sure if anybody checked that out, but if you didn't, I think the recording should be available soon. And they showed a lot about ArcGIS Urban, which is really cool and online based, allows for a lot of cool suitability analysis and things like that. And they have an imagery extension that I really like too. It's just the nice thing about desktop, and I completely share that sentiment with Victoria, is that you get a desktop license. There might be a couple extensions, but you can do most everything in the basic version of an advanced ArcGIS Pro license, whereas each of these additional add-ons are adding on to your online license. So like for imagery, it's easier, even though the town has some really high quality imagery from 2021, it's easier for me to just deal with the slightly lesser quality of the Mass GIS imagery because I don't have to pay anybody to host our imagery if I'm only using it offline. So there's definitely shortcomings that when you're budget limited can be a bit of a burden, where the online tool might have progressed, but every time, development is expensive. And as a result, every time a development is added, it's typically added as an extension. One thing that is included that we've really started to latch into is ArcGIS Workforce, which is a pretty cool online system for tracking work orders and things like that. So we're tying that into a 311 system, and it's a whole cool thing. But yeah, I definitely agree with Victoria that the online can be lacking, and when it's not lacking, it's often at an additional cost for those tools.
Yeah. I mean, from our group, we were having an interesting discussion on the, it was funny. It was a lot of folks from kind of the higher ed side, looking for, what are some of those things, what are the drivers or what are the needs, and just waiting to get some answers. And one of the ones I found that was interesting was Rebecca kind of mentioned travelers. The insurance company came and spoke at the university recently, and that was over at UMass, right, Rebecca?
Yes.
And you had mentioned just the web, the kind of cloud or that side. Did they go into any details on, what things they were kind of looking for? Was it?
Yeah, so the skill set that it sounded like the people they hire into that program they're looking for are ability to use SQL and other querying languages to access like giant databases that are being updated in real time. So it's like real-time cloud-based GIS.
Huh.
And what they're doing is all kind of, it's not public facing. They're preparing products for their own insurance agents to then take into the field.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was way beyond desktop GIS capabilities.
Sure. So big data, air quotes. I know data science is a very hot term right now for everybody to throw around, but yeah, it sounds like getting into that area of kind of GIS. Interesting.
Brian or others, were there other perspectives from the higher ed group of kind of what you see are the needs? What are you trying to focus on to teach your students to best equip them for finding employment after they're done with their education? Andy?
Robert had an interesting comment, which is that parcel editing was really useful for people employed in the urban planning type area. And that's not something that I think typically gets taught when using in GIS curricula. It's actually something that I've taught, but the reason is because I was doing historical GIS and needed to regularize census tracts from multiple decades, because they're all slightly different. You get the shape files from different decades, all slightly different. So being able to put them into the same standard size, really benefited from being able to use that type of process of moving boundaries around.
Matthew?
Yeah, well, I just want to see if people would agree with this sentiment. What it seems like, the impression I'm getting overall is, it seems like for higher ed to prepare students for the workforce, breadth is going to be more important than depth. They might need to sacrifice deeper knowledge of desktops ArcMap and ArcPro in order just to have more experience or just small exposure to a lot of different items. That's the impression I'm getting overall. I'm wondering if people agree with that or have a different sort of sense.
I really agree with that, and that's what I try to do in my class. Is we focus on ArcGIS Online, and there's so many different tools and applications that you can use there. So it's just giving a very brief introduction to dashboards, Survey 123, story maps, et cetera, just the idea that, to me, it's like just letting people know what is out there so that when they're faced with a project or something, a problem that they need to solve, they're like, oh, there's this tool called dashboards that could be really good for this, or oh, maybe that would be really nice in a story map. It's like, what are the differences between those two solutions and when do you apply them? So I agree with you, Matthew. I think for me, I try to expose students to as many things as possible rather than just deep diving solely in story maps. That's it.
As far as the higher education goes, how many classes with GIS in the title do people typically go through, either for a minor or a major, in order to get that as well? I know personally I had my intro class, my advanced class, and then essentially an applications class where I had a semester-long research project, and then some other elective courses. So I took like watershed management and landscape ecology and a couple others that were tangentially related, but didn't necessarily directly use GIS tools. I think that's relevant as well, because depending on how many classes you have those students for total across the course of their program, really depends on how much you can teach them in that time and how many topics you can cover at any serious depth.
Absolutely. I think there's definitely something to be said between the difference between an actual GIS program or just being a GIS class in a program. Like my class doesn't have any prerequisites. So I get students who have never heard of GIS before and others who have worked as GIS professionals for 5 years and just want to learn about web GIS. So I think, yeah, what are folks' thoughts on that of kind of, to Robert's point, of kind of scaling based in a program versus just kind of having people pop in? Matthew, you had something to add?
Oh, no, I'm happy to jump in there and give a response for what our programs are like. I'll try to limit myself, no promises. So it's hard to get people to actually just do a full-on GIS degree. We tell people, hey, this is good for you, good for your career prospects, blah, blah, blah. They don't sign up because it feels like a lot of work. Meanwhile, they sign up for the environmental program, which has GIS courses in it really easily and naturally, and they're excited for that. So we're trying to focus more on that, but it means there's fewer GIS classes that they're going to experience. So one thing we're trying to implement for the fall is a new GIS certificate, which is bite-sized enough that you'll actually get people to do it. Like a minor, they have to do, winds up being 5 classes because it's 4 credits for each GIS class, needs 18 to be a minor credits. So it's 5 GIS classes, too much. Basically means I got 3 classes to teach them all the GIS to be ready for the job market for the certificate that we're prepping in the fall, of which is really GIS 1 and GIS 2. That's why like a lot of my questions are concerning about breadth and depth. It's like, all right, I have 1 class for sure that they all have to take that's required, and then maybe another GIS class. Can I get them what they need to know in 2 GIS classes? And how do I separate out that time that they're gonna know ArcGIS Pro? If they tell people that they know ArcGIS Pro, how much ArcGIS Pro can I get them to know so they will meet the expectations while also doing the online and also doing, like, Java would be a little bit new, and Python, like getting that in there. It's a real struggle to get it in a curriculum that you get students to sign up for.
I think too, it came up a little bit in our discussion, and I think it connects back to what you said earlier too, Robert. My fear as well is, from the industry side and from, academia, it sounded like a lot of us are looking in Indeed to kind of understand and try to see where things are going. But then like what you were saying, Robert, your experience is there's a lot of outdated requirements out there. There's a lot of just kind of, organizations that will throw everything against the wall. And, I see those job postings where they want someone that knows, Java, C++, Python, it's like they Googled programming or, computer science and just listed everything in a job post and added GIS. And it's like, and I think you brought this up in our discussion as well, Matt, it's like, to what depth? I mean, it's that, and that's this challenge. It's, yes, to expose people to certain tools and skills and knowledge, but then when you're listing something on your resume, and I mean, I know for me coming out of undergrad, it's, you just kind of like, I don't know why, but I had like Excel and all, you just kind of throw whatever the hell you want on your resume, just like trying to grab at straws. But it's like, what in a GIS cert is enough to let people kind of feel comfortable having that knowledge and that skill? I don't have an answer, but it's just fascinating to see this kind of dance of this challenge.
Beware if they're asking for Avenue.
Run away.
Yeah, we had, so I used to be the operations manager before I switched to the municipal side for the company I used to work for. And we had a crew of techs doing visual review for secondary assets and pavement inspection. And then we hired on a few techs at a slightly higher rate who had backgrounds in GIS. And I had two people, one of whom had an undergrad degree in, I think it was environmental science or something along those lines, but had some exposure to GIS, and then one who had a master's degree in geology and a GIS certificate from that university that she earned at the same time. And the one from the environmental program was far and away a better GIS tech than the one who had the piece of paper that said she knew GIS, because she just had no problem solving skills. She had been given very specific instructions throughout her program that she was able to consistently meet. But the other woman who was doing a very similar job had thought of those in a very different mindset. And I think to what was previously said about, sometimes you're pulling in these environmental science students. For myself as a fish and wildlife student, intro to GIS was required. But I had already had a little bit of exposure to it previously, so I knew right from the get-go I wanted to be a GIS minor. But that's really, I think that intro to GIS class is really the chance to sort of sink your teeth in, or in the case of the professor, sink your talons in to try and get them into the program to get into more courses. But at the same time, that problem-solving perspective is just as important as any hard skill. And I think definitely with this sort of mild wide and an inch thick understanding that everybody needs to have in GIS at this point to really be able to get into all these different applications for it. If you have that problem solving perspective in your mindset as you're approaching problems, even if you don't know the way to solve it, you can pretty quickly find a Stack Exchange post of somebody who's done something similar. And it's really problem solving that gets you from Stack Exchange to your end product. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Robert. And that's something that is often incidental to what we're teaching. But if you're teaching a programming class, though, hopefully that's something they learn. I have one student tell me that I learn best from examples, and my response was, no, you learn best by trying to apply the examples to new situations. Yeah. And that's just, that carries over to so many other things.
I thought, oh, sorry, I saw that Bahari had her hand up.
I'm sorry.
Is that okay, Dawn? And then we'll hop over to you.
That's okay, Dawn. Go ahead. I will go after you.
Okay. I joked before about command line ArcInfo, but I see a difference in how I was taught GIS on command line ArcInfo than most people today who always had the GUI available. And now, especially with ArcPro and the geospatial search, and when it was command line, you had to understand what it was doing and what it was going to do, and you learn the hard way after 3 days of commands before you hit those dreaded letters, GRAW, to find out if it was right or not. And so, you know, we have the instant gratification of being able to see it, but we don't always have that, what is the tool doing and why and how and when do you use which one and what is really going the result going to be, and really kind of breaking down that problem into those spatial steps. You know, I just, you know, well, I hit the button and that's what came out. Like, I don't really care if you hit the button, that's what came out. Why did you hit that button? Why did you hit the other button? Like, so I really, you know, when it was just command line, you didn't have those buttons to rely on. You didn't have those easy help files. You know, you had to really understand why. And I don't always see that in the new grads coming out. I see it in some, and I see that's really where you have the difference in between, you know, okay, are you just going to come on as a GIS technician and, you know, I need somebody to pretty much babysit you because you are just hitting buttons, or can you be a specialist or an analyst and kind of think more about it and think through the problem? And, you know, previous to my role here at Control Point, I was at Princeton University for 13 years. So I had interns all the time. And my best interns are like sophomores. I don't want you to know a whole lot of GIS, and we can kind of go through things, and then I'm going to throw things at you and you're going to figure out how to do it. And then you're also going to write it down and document it and replicate it. And then I train you once and I can maybe get 3 summers out of you. And, you know, by then, you know, I also know you more as a person, and, you know, I can make a much higher job offer because I know that person. And so I just find that it's the curiosity. It's the people that want to know why, don't want to just hit the buttons. And yeah, that's a big deal. That is huge.
So I will go like very brief. I agree very much with Robert, Andy, and also Dan regarding the students. What I do at Northeastern, I am helping on hiring students for different grants who are having GIS project. And what I'm looking for is looking for the student with passions to learn more and not necessarily knowing even GIS, like, you know, just getting them into my office or online and then showing them the concept of GIS. That's what you need to know. And then I will send them through the path. And normally they are coming out as people who really know about GIS. So I am necessarily just looking for if this student is a good researcher or not, if this student is willing to learn or not. And then like, you know, if they have the knowledge about that specific project, because if this is a history project, I prefer to get someone from the history department rather than someone from engineering, because they have the concept. They already wrap their mind around the matter of history. And this is one example that I am putting on the chat. This is the mapping Black London in World War II, which happened in the Department of Art History with people with no GIS background whatsoever, and they just learned the concept, and then, you know, a couple of consultation sessions with me, and then there you go, they have this, they are coming out with more project in future, not knowing ArcGIS Desktop, by the way, or Pro, because we had the georeference map ready. So for their future one, they are learning ArcGIS Pro because they need to georeference the maps, the historics maps that they have, and georectify them. But that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank everyone for sharing. I can't believe that we just have 10 minutes left here. So I just want to be respectful of everyone's time, but this has been an incredible conversation. So thank you all so much for coming and for sharing and being open to discussion. Thank you, Brian, again, for helping to inspire this event and make this happen with us here at NEARC. Just a couple of things kind of in closing, and Brian and I kind of talked about this, that we were kind of talking and to see, like, where do we go to have these conversations? Like, how do we find other people that want to talk about these things and to be able to share ideas, especially when it comes to to GIS in education, or hearing about what other folks in the field are really looking for when they're looking for the skills that these students have coming out of schools. So we really want to keep this conversation going. And I mean, I feel like just based on this experience that hopefully, I'm curious, like, would people be interested in continuing this if we hosted another event centered around higher education to kind of try to keep this conversation going either through community events or at a NEARC event in person? People be interested? Awesome. Yeah, I think so too. Andy, did you have something you wanted to share?
I was going to say that Spring NEARC in a month has traditionally had a strong higher education component, and it's being hosted at Westfield State near Springfield. So I urge everyone to come there if you can.
Thank you, Andy. That was perfect. Because I wanted to mention that, yes, we have our spring event coming up May 16th. And as Andy said, the spring event, we rotate through universities within the Northeast. So it's a great opportunity to kind of get more students involved. And I know there's a number of folks from various universities on this call. So if you're interested in potentially hosting a spring NEARC at your university in a future year, then that's definitely an option too. And then also at the fall conference, we have the NEARC Educators Day, and that happens on the Sunday before the conference. So this year, that will be November 6th. And we're just now starting to pull together the host committee to organize that event. So if you are interested in getting involved, that there are opportunities. And we're trying to decide whether or not that Educators Day should be in person or virtual. The NEARC events themselves are going to start going back in person. We will not be doing any more like hybrid conferences, but it's a little bit of a different situation with the educators because we all have to go to work on Monday and can't really take time off during the semester to attend. So having that event as virtual might make us more accessible to folks. So I encourage you, if you are interested and want to get involved with Educators Day, I think that's a great opportunity that's coming up in November. And I think
Where's that going to be?
that is going to be at the Mount Washington Inn in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Yes, we are very, very excited for that event. So I'm going to send a follow-up email after this call with a couple links just to NEARC resources. And Brian, I know we didn't have time to get to it, but Brian had a number of different resources that he wanted to share, some ESRI resources and things of the like. So I'll have Brian send those to me, and then I'll put them in the follow-up email if that's okay, Brian. But did you have any other final takeaways that you wanted to mention, Brian?
I think just wanted to mirror what you said, Katie. Thank you so much to everybody that participated in the discussions. It was a really fun conversation. And, you know, sometimes, especially in this, for me, I'm still sitting at home. I feel like I am just kind of making up things in my head, and who knows, you know, what I'm thinking of. So to hear that others are having similar challenges, or that, you know, I'm not just making all this up in a slide deck is great to have reinforced. And it was a really fun conversation with everybody. So thank you.
Yeah, I encourage folks too, if you want to pop your LinkedIn in the chat, and then we can connect with each other on LinkedIn. I know for one, that's a great way for me to follow up with folks. And that's actually how Brian and I met, was just connecting with one another on LinkedIn. And then that's where this event came from. So I encourage you to connect on LinkedIn. And if you have an idea for an event or something that you want to do to collaborate with NEARC, then please reach out to me and we can make that happen. So we do have 5 minutes left if anybody has any final comments. Otherwise, thank you again so much for coming, and look forward to talking to you again soon. All right, thanks everyone. Thank you.
Thanks everybody.